we're talking about is there going to be another search, and should there be another search? And if there is another search, will it be successful? So to lay the groundwork for that question, we're going to ask, well, why did they look in the Southern Ocean in the first place? And where did they look, and how did they look? And that will help us understand whether they should look more.
In the very first episode, our very debut episode, we talked to Peter Waring, who was one of the Australians who was conducting the search, about what it was like to work as part of that organization overseeing the search. And we have some more audio from that interview. So let's play some of that.
So the ATSB issued me this really fancy BlackBerry, but it was the first touchscreen BlackBerry. And you're a naval officer. All of the work phones I'd had to that point were old Nokias that you could just... And then the ATSB were quite technologically savvy, IT-wise. And so I remember waking up vividly, and the first thing I would do is look at this fancy BlackBerry and see whether there's that email saying, we have a contact, we think it's an aircraft. And I did this... kind of like a mock-up, right? So we have pictures of the debris field that they found for Air France 447, and I scaled it and put it across the data that we were producing and sent it to the ships to say, this is what it's going to look like. And we had a couple of things that got close. There was one incident where we thought we may have found it. And it was funny because part of my job, and it's one of these, there are all these little moments during this year where I thought, man, and I don't say this in the other podcasts, but really I should, is that the ATSB were just the wrong organisation to run a search, to run something of this magnitude. They'd never done anything like this before. And they really shouldn't have ever had any input to this whatsoever. When the French searched for Air France 447, they put an admiral in charge. And he developed his own team with various experts, but they had an operational guy in charge. They did not do that at the ATSB, and they really struggled for it. So there were a couple of Navy guys there, but we were... I didn't come until the search area was drawn, and I could see things were going in the wrong direction and tried to do something about it. But I think they would have recognised that the amount of information they had, the amount of evidence they had was minimal. And so drawing a search box whilst the analysis was still ongoing was probably politically necessary, but operationally it caused a lot of problems, because it became very obvious at one point that we were looking in the wrong box. And what's interesting is, after I left, the government said, we're going to finish the 120,000 square kilometres and that's it. And so to try and get ahead of the game, the ATSB, and this was driven by Pete Foley, commissioned a new search strategy group to come up with a new search area based on all the evidence that they'd now uncovered. And a lot of that was to do with the drift modelling and also the work by Ian Holland, which is the rapid descent at the sixth arc. So using that data, they then drew this new box to the north of the box that we'd been looking in. It was 25,000 square kilometres, and they assigned a probability of around 90%. We are 90% sure that the aircraft is in that box.
So what Peter is saying is that they had done these calculations using the Inmarsat data, and the Inmarsat data, after some really fancy math, basically told them where the plane had gone. In a way, I want to put a caveat on that immediately, because this data isn't like GPS data where it gives you latitude and longitude.
Yeah.
It basically tells you, if you give it a route, it will tell you whether that route matches it or not. So the way that you can figure out all the possibilities of where the plane might have gone is you create a Monte Carlo simulation.
It sounds like it makes me think of gambling, or it makes me think of James Bond or something.
It's like you can either calculate the probability of a certain hand of cards, or you can just play a million games of cards and see how many times it comes up. And so this is basically just doing that. It's randomly generate a lot of flight routes and then see which ones match the Inmarsat data, and you wind up getting a kind of a heat map. Mm-hmm. And they wound up sort of drawing a box on the southern seabed that encompass like a 99% probability. So that's pretty good. You know, if you told me there's a 99% chance you're going to give $1 million, I'll like definitely start thinking about.
I would
like,
go to Monte Carlo and I would
I
gamble
would go to Monte
if
Carlo.
there's a 99% chance of winning any game.
Yeah,
even
exactly.
if it was in French, I would do it.
So basically, so Peter is talking about they had a 99% chance and they send the boat out, and every day they're like, we're going to chip another piece out of this 99% probability, and one of them is going to be the payoff. He would look at his phone or his BlackBerry, and it would be yes or no. And he every morning he woke up thinking it's going to be yes, and it never was yes. And they were just baffled.
Yeah.
And they were like, okay, wait, what did we get wrong? What did we miscalculate? And they were like, okay, wait, there's a certain assumption about, we assumed that the data was generated by this thing, but maybe it was generated by another thing. Maybe, so basically, maybe instead of going south at that point, it was actually not going south, but it was in a descent. And so that would explain why we didn't find it. So they made that assumption. It seemed kind of unlikely, but it was the last best hope. And they said, okay, listen, we didn't find it. We have run out of money. We have run out of time. We can't search it. But they issued a report saying, like, it has to be here. They were like, there's an 85% chance that it's in this last place that we didn't look.
A lot of this we covered in episode 11. We're talking right now about what the plane might have done as it was running out of fuel, where
Right.
it could have been on the seventh arc if it would have glided and then plunged headfirst into the ocean, if Zahari would have had a change of heart at the last minute, brought it back into a glide, then
Right.
plunged it into the ocean. So they considered all of these things as they kept expanding their search.
Yeah. Yeah. We might do an episode where we look really, we basically recreate that kind of final plunge. Maybe we'll do that pretty soon, actually. They were like, okay, this is where we left it before, which is that they were like, we didn't find it, but we know where it is. So long, see you later. And obviously, a lot of the family members are not happy about that.
I would think not. And then Ocean Infinity gets involved.
Well, like a year goes by, everyone's like, oh,
Yeah.
I guess that's a failure. But then this sort of white knight emerges.
Right. So I've got January 10th, 2016. Malaysia has contracted with Ocean Infinity. It's a U.S. company, and they say they're going to find it.
Right. So everyone was calling, oh, there's this U.S. company called Ocean Infinity, but it's like literally there's a name and like an address. That's it. We don't know anything about who these people are or where their money is coming from or what their motive is. But they just emerge out of nowhere and they make this kind of unusual proposition, I would say. Yeah. Which is they say, okay, Malaysia, we know that you don't really want to spend any more money on this, but you don't have to spend any money on it unless we find it. I'm suspicious by nature. So my spider senses was tingling. I'm like, who is just running around with this money burning a hole in their pocket that they want to spend it on a search? I actually tried to reach out to the person that was listed like on this business registry. And I'm like, you should talk to me before you go spend. I mean, it's always kind of killed me, Andy, that they were spending hundreds of millions of dollars. And meanwhile, I was like slowly going broke in this very difficult media environment. And I'd spent all this time and energy, and I'd seen I'd predicted that they wouldn't find it in the Southern Seabed. They didn't find it in the Southern Seabed. I felt like you should listen to me before you go running around. Like, why don't you spend some money figuring out what the heck's going on before you run around the Southern Ocean for no good reason? Anyway,
I take it they didn't return your call.
You are 100% correct. They did not return my call.
I'm not happy that they still haven't found it, but
Nor am I.
Yeah. Well, okay. So they said that they, instead of just using robot subs, they were going to use these AUVs, which sound like fancy drones. They were
AUVs is a fancy word for drones.
They're going to be more accurate. They're going to be faster. They did a bigger area in 1/9 the amount of time.
I mean, it's a testament to how incredibly fast technology is changing in this day and age.
Right.
That basically, in the span of just a couple of years, because at the time that Fugro started the search back in 2014, what they were using was state-of-the-art technology, and that had what Fugro did at the time was unprecedented. That had never been done that much, that deep, that quickly. So that was a huge, kind of landmark feat. But then it was obsolete within a couple of years. That they had this new technology, which is instead of pulling something behind on a rope, basically, or a steel cable, really, they were letting them go free, like a little flotilla of underwater, Robot babies.
Do you think Ocean Infinity was a legit company that had the possibility of finding something had it been there?
I had no idea what it was, and of course my imagination ran wild. Then just a couple months ago, Business Week ran a really long article about the people behind Ocean Infinity, and it turned out they were basically like rich hedge fund people who had some money. They just had so much money that they were like, let's like take a high risk gamble, and they're basically treasure hunters. They're looking for like ships that sank during World War II full of gold, and like Spanish galleons full of gold and stuff
Have
like
they
that.
found any?
I think they have. And one thing they did find was there was another great mystery where the Argentinians lost a submarine.
Yeah,
And it was like they had no idea where it was, and they went and they found it. So these guys are
Okay.
legit, actually.
Okay. Well, nonetheless, they didn't find anything, and
They searched an area. It took them like what it took Fugro like 2 years to do. They did in like 1/9 of the time. And they wound up searching actually a bigger area and probably more accurately too. So again,
Okay.
this is like technology kind of going by leaps and bounds.
So from time to time, Ocean Infinity expresses some interest in restarting the search, which is...
Oh wait, can I tell you one more thing?
Oh, sure.
So apparently they found some shipwrecks, but they didn't tell the Malaysians anybody like what they were, because this is their real business, is finding shipwrecks with maybe valuable support.
So wait a minute. So you're telling me that they were on their mission for Malaysia, of which they would get paid if they found, and by the way, along the process, they found some shipwrecks that presumably had some value to them.
I mean, I would
They're double
I would
dipping?
rather
Is that
say
what
like
you're
they
telling me?
presumably didn't have anything valuable on them, but they might have.
But had they, that would not have been Malaysia's bill
Then
to
Malaysia
foot.
would have no claim about it. No, not at all.
That's
They're
double
like in
dipping.
international waters. I don't think anybody has a claim. I
Okay.
I know nothing about
I don't have
admiralty law.
specifically have a problem
It's
with
interesting,
that, but it's notable. It's interesting.
Yeah, interesting. Remember, the Australians had said like there's this one area. It's like 25,000 square kilometers. It's got to be somewhere in there. And they said in their report, if it's not there, we are basically out of ideas. And so Ocean Infinity searched that 25,000 square kilometers and way beyond it, way, way, way beyond it, and didn't find it there either. So they're basically, remember, I was starting to say before that, like the way you find where you should look is you do these Monte Carlo simulations, and every simulation results in simulated flight path results in an end point, where you run out of fuel and you crash into the ocean, right? And for every endpoint, there's like basically a story. Like, I flew south at this speed, I took a turn at this point. If you want to look at any place beyond where you've already searched, pick a point and tell me what the story of that is, because it's going to require changes of speed, changes of altitude, changes of fuel burn, and so forth. And that gets you to that point. But what you wind up with is really kind of outlandish stories. Like, the plane is taking just completely random turns, changing speed, flying at weird speeds for no reason. And so it gets very probabilistically unlikely.
Victor and the rest of the independent group suggested that Ocean Infinity's next search is farther away from the seventh arc, up to 45 nautical miles.
So when you're thinking about where to look, there's basically two questions that you can ask yourself, which is like, how far up and down the seventh arc should I look, and how far away from the seventh arc should I look? And basically, all of the people who assume that the Inmarsat data is real and valid and have been looking at the debris drift modeling have all concluded that there's like actually a very, very narrow stretch of the seventh arc where this thing could have wound up when it sent that final ping. And so the only real viable choice now is to look further away. Well, there's two things, actually. You can look further away, and this is what Victor has spent a lot of time talking about, looking within the area that's already searched to see if there's like crevices or crannies or nooks or like the shadow of a cliff or something like that. Or maybe there was a bump that they like didn't look at closely enough and it was a piece. Maybe it couldn't be the whole plane because that would be too big, but maybe it's a piece of the plane, and that's another clue. So basically they're looking at an area that has already been searched, but they want to look further away. So they've already looked up to I think it's 25 nautical miles, and they want to extend that outwards a bunch of miles, maybe 43 or something. I'll have to
I
check
mean,
the
hey,
numbers.
it's not my money. So if they want to do it,
Well, so the question is, okay, so as I said, like any place you're searching, you're basically positing a story.
yeah,
And the story that they're positing is that the plane flew further than the authorities believed. Remember, we spent a whole episode talking about, I think we did, talking about how the plane was in a steep and accelerating dive and it was
yeah,
going almost straight down.
yeah,
So it was diving almost straight down and it was smashed into a million pieces. It seems like there's a very simple story to be told.
yeah.
But how can you get further away from than 25 miles if you're like in a nosedive? And the answer is that he had a change of heart. He was halfway down this death slide, and he's like, you know what? Actually, let me just glide as far as I can go, and I'm going to use the residual altitude that I still have to get me a little bit further. And then he's like, you know what? I've flown 43 miles, and you know what? I had the right idea the first time. Let me put it back into a steep dive, and I'm going to smash it into the ocean.
Again, I'm not a professional or amateur psychologist, but if you have the level of planning involved in your 6-hour suicide mission, you might think that someone would not have that change of heart at the very end for a few minutes.
So there's the issue of like the unlikelihood of the change of mind, but then there's also the unlikelihood of the timing because all of these things have to happen within a like less than a minute window.
Right.
And he would have had to have a really sharp change of mind and then followed by another really sharp change of mind. So if you're going to say like, well, we think it could be further than 25, but probably not further than 43. It's like you're already, remember, they thought that they had searched like a 99% area, and then another whole bunch was searched, and you're left with the dregs
Yeah.
after that. I mean, what you're left with is a place that at the beginning of the search, you would have thought it was vanishingly unlikely.
These guys are doubling down, tripling down, quadrupling down on
Their
something that
attitude
isn't
is we are
working.
never going to reconsider the possibility that this data was tampered with.
Yeah.
Like we will go to the weirdest, most unlikely, we'd rather have it cartwheel end over end for 50 miles than to imagine that the data was tampered with.
Right.
Even though it seems increasingly uncontroversial that the data could be tampered with.
Yeah.
I think that the fact that they also don't want to revisit the weirdness of the biofouling on the debris.
They want to revisit anything.
They don't want to revisit anything.
Again, it's not our money. Go for it. But we've already put it out there. We're saying the plane did not go south into the southern Indian Ocean. They're looking in the wrong place.
Well, we're not saying it. We're not exactly saying it didn't. What we're saying is that the Bayesian priors, if you open up, if you reassess your Bayesian priors, you're going to get a different probability distribution of what's possible. And the idea that these, multiple unlikelihoods, chained one after the other that are necessary in order to get an endpoint in the Southern Indian Ocean at this point is relatively small in relation to a spoof hypothesis. And I guess I'm not, and again, I think this is what we started this entire series, like saying like, we're not trying to tell you like this is definitely what happened, but we're trying to get you to shift your assessment of what are the options you should be looking at.
Okay, so can I say that we probably don't think that the plane is in the Southern Indian Ocean?
Okay.
Are you okay with that?
I mean that's like,
I feel kind of dumb after saying all those things.
I'm like the lawyer. I'm like lawyering it.
Okay.
It's true. I mean, you could the upshot is that like we think it's more likely that the data was spoofed than that the data was not spoofed.
Fine, I'll go with that.
But so if the question is, should we get excited for an ocean infinity search? Because a lot of family members have been pushing for exactly this. Continue the search. You promised you'd search until you found it. You haven't found it, so keep searching. And what I'm saying personally is I wish you wouldn't actually, because I think it's time to accept defeat. I think it's time to say we have enough basis to revisit our priors. If this thing is possible, then we need to explore it. And I think, and so I basically, it's like giving another delay for a trial that has already been solved. You know what I mean? I don't think this trial needs another appeal.
I mean, I suppose on the upside, if they look for it and spend a bunch of time and money and new technology and they continue to not find it, it will be increasingly harder for them to say, we must have just missed it. Maybe.
That's an interesting idea. I mean, I felt back in 2015 when I, first went public with this spoof idea that like if they search where they say they've assured the public it was going to be in the first search area,
Yeah.
and they didn't find it. I thought then people would be like, "Oh, okay, well, we need to revisit this idea." It didn't happen. Didn't happen after the first Ocean Infinity search. I wonder, like, is there ever enough negative information that you will start to say, "Wait, maybe our premise is faulty"?
I guess we'll find out. That's why I wanted to preview what's coming up in this podcast.
Okay.
We haven't done a ton of speculation as to what happened to the plane, if it made it to or near Kazakhstan, and more importantly, why. And we will start getting into that stuff. So I just want the readers and the listeners and the viewers to know that it's coming. And despite the fact that you don't want to do it, it's something that actually.
It's not that I don't want to do it. I just want to make sure that we have carefully laid the groundwork for it. I think it's like we're building a skyscraper, and it needs to have a firm foundation.
Yeah, well, it's getting pretty tall. And the other thing, and I'm not going to reveal this, is you do have some information that nobody else has. But people should know that from here on out, it's not just imagination, science fiction, alt history. Like there's more.
It's never been science fiction. And like along these lines, I would say that you and I, spent a lot of time dotting our I's and crossing our T's in preparation for last week's episode, because we felt like we were making some pretty big claims and we wanted to make sure that it would hold up. And I feel like I'm glad that we really took our time, because I think it is really solid.
Me too. I was really pleased with that one.